Call the meeting to order for the short-term rental working group to see how this is going to go. First, I want to thank Melinda for her staff work. Thank you very much. And if you take a look at today's agenda, it's a little different from what our agendas have been so far. This is more of a get down to cases and try to go through it one by one so that rather than wide open comments and observations of current practice in town, it's what would we like to have, and to begin at the top, which is where Maura keeps urging us to go, which is what is our purpose? What are we trying to do? So are there any modifications to the agenda as it is now? No? Okay, good. I have a few more items that I'd like to see appear on future agendas, but we'll get to that at the tail end of the meeting. Did you all get the minutes? And have
Yes.
a chance to review them?
Yes.
Very fine minutes. Thank you. Nice and complete. That's good. And you'll see that we've already been through quite a bit of what we tended to do, which is find out what's the situation here in town, get a rough handle on how many ADUs, on how many short-term rentals we already have, and where are we going to go with that. And it seemed to be in favor of regulations, perhaps bylaws, but we need to know first what will be the purpose of it. So looking at the other work that other towns have done, were there any that stood out to you as being pretty much what you would like to see happen in Falmouth? Which parts of them would you like to see? So this is, what should Falmouth's purpose be in regulating or controlling in some way, restricting short-term rentals?
I would say the first thing we do is require a license for any short-term rental.
A purpose would be like, maintain the residential character.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Right, not how to do it, but why are we even doing this?
To mitigate impacts to neighborhoods and to ensure a balance of year-round rentals versus short-term rentals. That might be.
So if you look at the initial short-term rental working group outline, there are goals, which is kind of the purpose listed there, that I think that we can take and then build off of if you'd like to, but it's under the first section, goals.
Well, and it was our working group outline that we began with, which is in your notebook.
I think Jed's gonna pull it up.
I didn't bring my homework.
Yeah, Kara's got mine, but, yeah.
Well, tell you what, let me read them to you, just to refresh your memory. They'll all sound familiar. One is to well, they're bulleted rather
Yeah,
than
right there.
numbered. Okay.
Thank you.
Existing quality of our residential neighborhoods. Existing character. Respect and maintain. I question that word maintain. Private property rights, because current private property rights don't restrict or even mention short-term rentals. So we will not be probably working on the status quo, which maintenance would suggest. So I say that we strike that word maintain.
Well, it's true, because this will have an impact.
Yeah, we're hoping to have an impact. I am.
I would agree with that then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any disagreement? No, we're good. So we're taking out maintain, but certainly we want to respect private property rights, protect the safety and welfare of the residents and their guests. That wording is pretty restrictive also. Do we want to keep with that? That implies, to me anyway, that they're all either owner-occupied or single owner only, to be guests.
Protect the safety and welfare of our residents and their guests.
Well, I don't see that
Yeah, I mean, it
as
could be a
harmful or problematic. I mean, we want everyone to be safe and secure. I mean, no matter what, if they're renters or residents.
Are we talking about restricting ownership to local people only, to current residents?
No. How could we do that?
I don't know.
I don't think we can do that legally.
Well, it wouldn't be just current at any point in time, residents, owners.
Because more than half the people who own here are not actually residents. They're residents of another town and they own property here. Right?
Mm-hmm. Maura, could you give us an opinion? Does that wording create any kind of problem for us?
Limiting short-term rental operations to residents only?
To residents and guests and their guests?
So I think you'd have a problem limiting the operation of short-term rentals to residents and their guests only under the Commerce Clause. I think it's a constitutional issue where you'd be impinging on the ability of a homeowner who isn't necessarily a resident. Part of it depends on how you're defining resident.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who's not a resident from using private property for profit. We can, and we have explored the other, another facet of that, though, that Doug, you brought to our attention early in the game about prohibiting properties to be used for short rentals from being owned by corporations. And there is a successful bylaw that was approved by the AG's office in Great Barrington, and I would like to draw on that if it's the will of the group.
Okay, we have that, actually.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Oh, I didn't bring your homework.
I didn't. I thought we were gonna get focused right on what the regulations, how we would regulate. I came with some ideas.
Good, and we'll get to them. If you can, hold it in mind.
Okay.
Wait up. Okay, the purpose at Great Barrington, they have 1, 2, 3. Enable residents to earn extra money from their properties to better afford to live here, maintain their properties, and contribute to the community. Minimize public safety and health risks, which would be, this is the safety one we've got there, and this is probably a better statement. Minimize public safety and health risks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Very general, yeah, or,
They do the same job.
they do, well, yeah, without creating a problem.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're taking notes, aren't you, Melinda? So
Yes.
Yeah. So it's coming from Great Barrington for that one. And then, going back to Great Barrington, deter commercial interests from buying housing to use primarily as short-term rental businesses. And that
that's
actually
the
is,
ultimate question,
to
right?
me, is one of our major objectives here. I don't know if Scott, if we all agree.
I do agree, but I don't think we can completely outright ban them from ownership, or maybe we can, but I'm not sure if we completely want to. Because you might have a property that's in an LLC, and maybe somebody inherited a house and they already owned a house, and they don't know what to do, they can't manage it all. And so I think there's
LLC
kind
is
of,
just a trust that owns something, it's not necessarily a commercial interest.
well, it could be. I think, so, if you, so I thought we were gonna talk about what we would do to regulate, and I was gonna say that maybe we would propose that any short-term rental be at least licensed, and then if you want more than one, maybe then it goes to the next level of some other type of permit application, maybe.
We're kind of up above there, we're trying to do the mission and goal, purpose, and
Okay.
then we'll get to the how we're gonna do it.
All right, I thought we did that already.
We did not really agree on it, we discussed it
Okay,
without actually coming to something that you would call a draft,
all right,
and then could move forward on. So that's where I'd like to get us
okay,
today, that we're closer to a draft, at least on some sections.
all right.
So, minimize public safety and health risks, deter commercial interests from buying housing to use primarily as short-term rental businesses. Would that language, Mara, cover commercial interest? Does that cover corporate ownership?
I'd have to look at it. When I go to draft the bylaw, I'll take all of this conversation into consideration. So, I'll take whatever the wish and the will of this group is and distill it down into language for the bylaw.
Okay, well, I think that we were in general agreement on our goals to begin with.
Great.
And since then, we've added a few coming from Great Barrington. So so that you would be able to do that section and bring us back a draft.
So can I ask then, if we could explore a little bit more about corporate ownership? Because I think Great Barrington is a good model, but then I did hear something just now where maybe there was a desire to not completely ban corporate ownership from operating B&Bs, so, I'm sorry, short-term rentals. But maybe could we explore like what the purpose of that is, so that I could figure out what the will is, so that I can figure out the language? What's the purpose of having people run these short-term rentals instead of a conglomerate? What's the goal?
Well, I think for me, it's the ability for local people who have been renting or have a need to rent for income to be able to maintain that opportunity. And then I don't think we need is corporate interest buying up several or multiple properties just for business use in residential areas.
That's
So-
very helpful. Just a concise statement like that will help me when I start putting pen to paper.
Do other people feel that that's a,
I feel like they're not coming to Falmouth being in sales. We're not getting a lot of that at all. Maybe it'll happen down the road, but with the prices being so high, I think they should have done this 10 years ago if they were gonna come in and buy a bunch of houses.
well, we gotta be ready for the next one because it's gonna happen
I
again.
think the market's gonna crash.
It always does.
There's a lot of cash out there now, though, but yes, I think,
And that's when the real cash comes out, when everybody else is
yeah,
broke.
yeah.
So
So,
can I
with-
explore that just a little bit more? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah.
If you have more stuff you wanted to say.
No, I think that was it.
What's the group's thoughts about individuals then owning or running multiple short-term rentals? So not corporations. I think that that's sort of the big bad, is to have
Mhm.
just some nameless corporation from across the country to just managing these properties
They already
from
have a
afar.
2% additional tax to it on that. So I have 2 homeowners in my inventory out of 100 homes, and they own 2 properties.
Mhm.
But they haven't exceeded 2. So I don't see a lot of owners buying for investment and just throwing 4 rentals together per se, but they're already getting hit with another 2% vacation
So there's already a deterrence out
It's a
there.
Yeah.
community impact fee, right?
community
But it-
impact fee. Thank you.
But it may not be a sufficient deterrent. To me, it would be better to spell it out. And I think the danger in corporate enterprise is that, generally speaking, corporations have deeper pockets than individuals. They can afford to buy more. They can actually not exactly take over, but manage the character of an entire neighborhood just because they have greater financial resources. Several towns that we have looked at have specifically excluded corporate ownership. They have specifically included ownership by LLCs as long as the owners can show that they are all local. And most of the trusts, I believe, here in town, just from people I know, they make it a trust because that way it solves continuity problems in ownership.
Mhm.
So they're an entirely different kettle of fish,
Okay.
but I would much rather see corporations specifically excluded if we possibly could. I wonder if there's any member of the public that wants to speak on that one point.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. This is Elizabeth Klein. I would agree with that for the same reasons that you just expressed. It is, one of the lovely things about short-term rentals is the entrepreneurial spirit that managing 1 or 2 rentals can provide for a person, and can be a really important source of income for individuals living in our area. And so I would advocate for maintaining that for an individual. And like you mentioned, Ms. Harris, I actually have the Provincetown bylaw here, and they also specify no corporate ownership. Ownership by an LLC is okay, but you have to show, again, that the members of the LLC are natural entities. They're actual humans that own that property.
Right.
Well, that's what I was alluding to, was the LLC would be okay. I'm calling that corporate ownership, but I agree with you, in the corporate sense of the word, I would like to exclude that.
Great. I think to the extent that we can actually, from the work that was done in our last hearing by Liz Klein, and reminded us in the minutes that it's there, the more that we can pattern ourselves on those Cape towns that have already passed bylaws, the more we are likely to get good enforcement, because it might be Cape-wide. It'll be a lot easier for Falmouth if what we're doing is the whole Cape or nearly the whole Cape. If we're more restrictive, well, that's different. But we don't want to be the loosey-goosey one either.
That's a great point.
Helpful to other towns too, when they're looking to adopt, if they say, boy, everybody else is doing this, maybe we should do that. So
Right.
I think this gentleman wanted to speak on the same thing.
Please.
I'm Hal Rude, 120 Mariners Lane. I wear two hats because 18 years ago, we bought a little house on Nye Road as just part of our retirement portfolio, just as an investment in our family, because we ran the Falmouth Road Race and fell in love with the town, and one day dreamed of retiring here, but also wanted, an investment as part of our portfolio. We're not a big corporation. It's just for us and a way to have sustaining income moving forward. But then a few years ago, as we're empty nesters, we decided to live here full time. So now we bought on Mariners Lane. So I'm actually now a voter and a full-time resident here. So, obviously the committee should keep in mind as you're, considering measures to take, that there are a lot of individuals, as has been already said, that not big corporations, they're individuals who just, in good faith purchased a house as a long-term part of the retirement mix. But as a voter and as a full-time resident, I also have concerns about, what might come out of this committee, because, now the town is kind of used to an income stream from that short-term housing rental tax. And the whole town's economic model is based on having a certain number of short-term rentals. And, if that's reduced, it's more kids in the schools, more expense, less short-term income tax. I feel like it brings a lot of uncertainty into the economic balance of the town. So I appreciate you giving us the ability to voice our concerns. So thank you for your time.
I don't think it would be reduced. It just won't grow exponentially, likely.
Right. Please, come forward.
Thank you. Paul Courtney. I'm at 81 Alexander Booker Road in East Falmouth. One part that I don't want to lose sight of, and I've worked with Liz and others in our group, is the idea that what we're trying to do is, because we know anecdotally about people who have moved here with the anticipation of finding housing and just couldn't find any good housing, that if we could take a modest percentage of the existing short-term rental stock and to convert that into long-term rental, if it was even 10%, if it was 100, 200 homes or housing units that could be transformed, then that would make a huge difference in terms of having people come here and actually be able to live and participate in the community. And I think I just want to keep that in mind, that on the one hand, as the gentleman mentioned, there are those other factors, but having a reduced number of children in the schools, we're supporting the schools right now because they have a certain fixed size, and that becomes an expense, and it becomes more and more expensive per child as we lose families. And so that's something to keep in mind, is that that's what happens when communities start to lose their character, and people come here for a certain character, and we don't want to kill the goose that laid all the golden eggs, so to speak. So
I think what you're talking about is a local long-term rental incentive program that's
yes, that's what we've
mentioned.
looked at. Yes.
And
I
it's
think
really
that what
not-
you're looking at is sort of how do we understand and regulate what's here, and I'm thinking about the larger picture, that that's not just all by itself. It's also hopefully the outcome would be to improve the long-term rental market. So
I think that's coming down the
Thank you.
list, right? We're just
That is
at
coming down the list.
top. So
And
we're
one
on
one of the
meeting
reasons
3,
that-
and we've really,
Right. But
crawling our way
he's
down.
making a point that it might be good to make at the top.
Absolutely.
If part of what we're doing, one of the reasons for doing this, it's to preserve the long-term rental opportunities on the Cape. Somehow, Maura, I don't know how you would word that, but to add, we're trying to protect the long-term rental opportunities.
If I could insert and kind of go off of the agenda a little bit and down to the second part for just a moment, to the other communities, the outreach. Because Jed and I spoke with the town planner of Provincetown today, right before this meeting, because they have what seems to be a successful bylaw or regulation process and a bylaw. It's a general bylaw. And they, we can talk later about those certain aspects of it if you want, but they do an incentive for their homeowners or property owners that lease long-term. They give an abatement through the assessor's office to their taxes.
That is hopping down the agenda.
Yes, but I'm just letting you know that.
Yeah.
And there's other things that we've already talked about, that I just, as it comes up, I just want to input what we've learned at from that, instead of like waiting to the end. So that when it comes up when we're speaking, I just want to be able to insert what we've learned today.
Thank you for continuing to research, and I'm sure there's a lot more out there.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Right, but now back on our train of thought here, we're trying to finish up on the goals. Not that we can't go back and revisit at the point that we have a draft, but if we can get in as many of our points now, we're more likely to get a complete draft. And it'd be good to see something on the preservation of long-term rental that's right up at the top of our document.
Okay, good.
That would be good. Okay, then, we can move, is there any other point that we want to include now at the top of this, whatever we're creating, bylaw, regulation? Then let's move on, purpose and scope. And so far, for this committee, we were going to investigate and find out as much as we could in order to move forward. So we'll bring that thought to now working on definitions. How many of the terms are definitions, Maura, that we can lift from other parts of our own bylaw?
How many terms are there that we can lift from other
That
parts
are,
of the bylaw?
let me rephrase that, that are undefined, that are new terms. We won't be defining short-term rental, the state did. What we use there.
Well, so but I was looking at these short-term rental definitions that we have to consider for this meeting, and there are things, I think, that can be provided some nuance. For example, I noticed that these all treat the shorter term of the short-term rental differently. The Nantucket definition excludes rental properties that rent for less than 14 days for some reason from the definition of short-term rentals. But the definition from Yarmouth says anything that's to rent for 31 consecutive calendar days or less. That is a term that varies widely across communities that have short-term rentals when you're defining what it actually means that we're talking about. How long, that's the essence of the issue here. So I do think it would be important for us to figure out the math on the short-term rental. Less than a year, but, I'm sorry, it's really within a month time frame. So not more than 31 days, but do you want to have a minimum? I don't know.
I don't think so. The shorter ones are just as problematic as the longer ones.
Actually, the shorter ones are the most problematic,
I
Right.
think so.
actually.
I think when they're here for 7 days or longer, it's more planned.
They're more invested.
Yep, yeah,
One night, it's like they might as well go in a hotel.
exactly. We're taking away the business of the hotels when they're doing 1, 2, 3 night rentals.
Right, and there are several towns I know in the Berkshires from trying to make arrangements to go to Tanglewood that you cannot rent anything for one night. You have to rent for a minimum of 2 nights, and in some places, 3 nights. So the more popular and expensive resorts are saying 3, and others are saying 2, but none of them are letting you come for just 1 night. So they've learned something that we could find out about.
It's not a good value to the renter either, because one night, then you gotta go in and clean it and
Right.
correct any issues for one night's income. We don't do it.
Yeah, I think it's a 3-night minimum that I've seen on all the websites.
Yeah.
3-night?
Yeah, our office doesn't do less than 7, but Airbnb, we need a vacation, they'll take 3-night stays.
They'll take
VRBO for
2
the
night
most
if you,
part is
they'll take
7
1 night
nights.
if you set it,
Yeah,
but you can set 2 nights, or then you can say 3 nights. You can go 2 nights, plus it automatically monitors whether or not a weekend is involved.
yeah,
Then it's a mandatory 3-night.
yeah. And
So
then
that's-
they raise the rent more per night if you do it less than 7.
Well, when people cheat on it, they pay for the 3 nights and go trash the place in 1 night. Scott, what have you learned from your experience with the rentals?
The time hasn't really come into play with any of our rentals. So when we get a complaint, I couldn't tell you whether there was more problem to be 3-day versus 14. So when I get a complaint, I don't know how long that person has been staying.
Right.
Normally, we find out after that person left, because it's so quick, it's usually a weekend transfer, we find out Monday morning.
Right.
And retroactively try to piece things together. So I couldn't tell you whether I'm getting more issues based on the time frame that the person happens to be, or the group of people that happen to be there.
Any experience or thoughts from the rest of you? You want to come speak to this issue?
I have a bit of experience from before Airbnb actually was going on, where I was administering a house that was renting short-term, and the experience quickly went from 1 or 2 nights to a minimum of more nights because of parties. Even though they were well-behaved, they still were disruptive to the neighborhood. And I rent a couple of rooms in my house, but I live there, and there's nobody that easily accommodates the people who need to get to a plane early from the vineyard, or who miss a boat coming from Boston trying to get to the vineyard. But the 1 night, I wouldn't do it, and I don't think many people do. So that's just my experience. I think it's fairly
Thank you.
common.
Anyone else want to speak on that question?
I just wanted to say,
Could you give your name, please?
yep, Hannah Vandershoorn, Glenwood Avenue. And I just wanted to say that I think it would be advantageous, like Nantucket, to maybe define short-term rental as being, 31 to 4 days or 31 to 7 days, because then maybe it would be harder to establish those 1, 2, or 3 day rentals that seem to be more the issue. So, but that seems to be what you're deciding to do now, so.
Okay. Any other information coming in or thoughts on it? Could we tentatively say that we're going to define short-term rentals as 31 days or less,
Yes,
but no less than 3?
you can do
3
that.
okay, or do you want to,
I don't know, you can do that.
we can,
I
and
don't
they've
think it
approved-
impacts the business. A good bylaw connects all of its pieces to the goal that you're trying to achieve. So if there's a reason why you would want to impose a minimum of 3 days that's tied to any of the goals that we keep talking about, then yes, that would be a good idea. So it might be interesting to explore how a minimum stay would achieve any of the goals about preserving property rights or maintaining health and safety in the neighborhood.
Well, from what we've heard, we think that it would.
So I think I heard that she was talking about the other end of the spectrum, not the minimum stay.
I think she was talking to 3 days or...
Yeah, I was talking about the minimum and establishing a minimum that would be definitely more than 1, because
Right, 'cause you said
from audience feedback.
7 to 3.
Yeah, I think having a longer, defining it 7 to 31 or whatever number is reasonable. I think it is nice to define a minimum to remedy some of the issues that
misunderstood.
people are saying. Yeah.
So there's an enforcement problem with that you want to consider?
We'll get to enforcement.
Sure, but you need to recognize that if you're going to define something, then if we're going to be able to understand whether a property is being rented out for 1 night or not and be able to enforce on that, it's going to be very difficult. And I encourage the group to put terms in the bylaw that are enforceable.
And we certainly are going to attempt to do that and set up an enforcement process that's likely to succeed. If it's well-funded, if it's well-staffed, it's likely to succeed. If it is a commonly known rule, it's very likely to succeed. And if it's a rule that's in common with real estate practices as they exist now, as was suggested, and with the practice in other places, then it's more likely to succeed. So I think that there's a pretty good likelihood of being able to keep to a 3-night minimum. I'm trying to recall now, I think that VR generally says 7 days. VRBO, and that's another very popular platform, but I'm really only familiar with 2 of the platforms. Scott, you seem to know more of them.
I think you can set it, as the owner, you can set it to whatever you want.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, if you, some platforms are more amenable to local regulations and they pay more attention to them. I think Airbnb is probably the premier as far as following rules. I think they were the first to recognize the state revenue and force everybody to do the revenue form. Everyone has to do it now, but with the 3-night minimum, I'm pretty sure Airbnb would recognize that, and they'd put an automatic block when anybody goes to try to rent on Airbnb. If we have that regulation, they're likely to have cataloged it and implement it into their software for Massachusetts or Falmouth. I don't know how town-specific they can get. I know they can get state-specific, but I don't know about the towns.
Right, and that's enforced. Actually, they don't take your reservation unless you give them the money,
And your request has to fit the parameters of the
Right.
controls that are in place.
what they're doing. So they're helping you enforce that. So let's go with the 3 to 31 as the definition of the time limits.
I would suggest we keep it as simple and broad as possible for now, because the more, as town council said, any opportunities we have to make it difficult is probably, I don't know, I think the simpler the better to start with.
Do you think that's not simple?
I think it's a wrinkle. I think it could complicate it, but if you guys all agree on it, it's fine with me.
It seems to be a wrinkle that's incorporated into the other bylaws that we're patterning on.
Is it only the Nantucket that has that, though?
Yeah,
Oh, no.
Nantucket's bylaw is still being litigated, so I don't look to Nantucket as an example.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not aware of other bylaws that have the minimum like that, but well, no, let me backtrack on that. I seem to remember there being another community that does it, but it's not a common thing. And again, it's an enforcement issue.
Right.
Someone else had her hand up first, so let's go in order.
You gotta tell us your name this time, though.
Yes, please.
Joan Letterman. I'm just not sure I'm understanding what you're discussing right now. When you're talking about the minimum of 3 days, are you talking about restricting individual homeowners to rent for less than 3 days?
No,
We're talking about prohibiting renting for less than 3 days, would be the effect of it.
Yeah, I think that could cause some problems in the flow, like there, especially with the science community in the summer, there are people coming and going so much that even though, for instance, I have a 3-day minimum often, if there's rentals with some space in between, and it's somebody from Hui or MBL that needs a couple of nights, then I can change it on the Airbnb platform and allow them to stay. And I think that's a really good freedom to have and service to offer. Just the flexibility.
Could we talk for a minute about the process that we're going to be following here? We're trying to, in effect, draft something that then goes to the larger community for a hearing as a complete thing, and then to town meeting. And we'll get a lot of feedback on it, right? So there'll be many opportunities along the road for testing the practicality of the thing. We don't want to wind up, as Maura and Scott have been pointing out, we don't want to wind up with a completely impractical kind of thing, or even faintly impractical. But I think the process will winnow it down. But if we begin with very, very few parameters, then we know we will end up with very few. And that's where we are now.
I just wanted to say that Sarasota, Florida would be a place to look into for somewhere that regulates rentals up, 7 to 31 days. So that would be a place to look for a bylaw.
7 to 31.
I believe so, yeah. There's a 7-day minimum on rentals there. I think they face some of the same problems. So just another government
Yeah.
to look into.
I think at some point you'll drive people underground.
Oh, you do? We're trying to get them out.
I know, so that's why you want to give them
Yes.
as much flexibility as possible.
Paul Courtney again. So I'm just taking something that Liz had left behind. This is from the, talking about local local communities, towns already doing something. Their definition of short-term rental in Provincetown is rental of a whole or portion residential secondary dwelling unit in exchange for payment as residential accommodations for not more than 30 consecutive days, and that's excluding hotel, motel, and whatnot. So it's just saying anything less than 30 days. So it's just kind of, you're not putting a minimum, you're just saying anything less than that is a short-term rental, which makes sense. It's, you're not trying to,
It's actually
Do anything
31, because the Massachusetts, they tax them. If you hit 30 days, they're getting 14.45% tax on their reservation. So you have to make your calendar 31 to avoid that wonderful tax, which is a couple $100 if somebody's staying for 31 days.
right,
That
so
one day makes the difference.
that may be why they say that it's not more than 30 consecutive days. That's
Yeah.
the short-term rental
Yeah.
definition. So
Right.
just using that as if we want to do something in common with other municipalities on the Cape, then something to keep in mind.
Just leaving it
Right.
open.
We will, but the thing I wanted to add to that is we're going along to, actually, a note to Melinda in person, is if we say now 3 to 31, and let's look into who else is doing what in Massachusetts, but particularly on the Cape, and see if there are more examples, but we can begin there. I think, are there other terms that we would be using in this that are not defined somewhere else in our existing bylaws? I think that's the only new thing we're doing.
Well, I think, if I may, looking at Provincetown, they define corporation. To my knowledge, I don't think we define corporation in our bylaws. Owner is defined, that might be a definition found. And then they also have a definition for timeshare, interval, or fractional ownership unit. So I think maybe instead of going into the weeds of each one of those, we can simply start thinking about terms that we
Need further
need to define
definition.
and bring that forward for the next meeting.
Well, I was looking at the commercial accommodations bylaw in preparation for today, because that now allows, these really are commercial accommodations. They're people making money, renting out part of their house or another residence. And that allows for commercial accommodations in every single zoning district here in town. And the land court so far has said that short-term rentals are commercial accommodations and do not belong in residential districts. So we seem to be somewhat at odds with that and would need to think about, well, I'm not sure whether this fits in definitions or not, but at zoning district eligibility, do we want to allow short-term rentals in every single zoning district except for, the exceptions I think were industrial and some odd one,
There's 2 industrial districts where it's not permitted, and I believe.
marine.
Marine, yes.
Right, so they're prohibited in 2, but not prohibited in the one that the state land court says isn't appropriate.
But I'd be surprised if we don't have them already in the Marine District. We have plenty of condos around marine areas.
The marine districts are actually very tiny. They're practically the size of the boatyard.
Okay.
So that might be another definition that we have to explore in our zoning bylaws, commercial accommodations. But again, I think we get to that a little bit later on.
Well, we're actually there right now, trying to go through the agenda list. Because we're purpose, definition, you're suggesting the fine-tooth combing on definitions will happen
Yep.
sort of off here, which brings us to zoning district eligibility. Next on our agenda. So I think it's good to get a sense of, all of us and the public, of where do short-term rentals belong in Falmouth? Do they belong in every residential district?
So this might be a good opportunity, as Melinda mentioned before, to sort of give the synopsis of our conversation with Provincetown, their town planner. So what Provincetown did, and Liz outlined this at the last meeting, was they instituted a general bylaw, which essentially allows short-term rentals to operate townwide. They have restrictions baked into that general bylaw, but they don't use the zoning bylaw to restrict where they can happen, because they just felt it wasn't appropriate to do it that way. But they
For
do
something
have,
specific to Provincetown? Or was there reasoning specific to Provincetown setup?
no, they just felt that through conversations with their town council, that it was better served to regulate the short-term rental facet through a general bylaw rather than a zoning bylaw.
That is my recommendation as well.
So it just allows, I think, his perspective was it allows a little bit more flexibility. And you can put a lot more rules into the general bylaw without loading down the zoning bylaw, which already has a lot of information in it.
It also solves the problem of whether units will be subject to a special permit process, which is already an overloaded process here in Falmouth. I'd like to see that actually trend the other way than adding more special permits to the zoning bylaw. Trying to regulate short-term rentals through zoning also creates a problem with grandfathered units, where we already know that there's a proliferation of short-term rentals. If there's an attempt to regulate through zoning, every single short-term rental would be grandfathered and not subject to the zoning code. So it doesn't actually, it would only capture new units. There's also the idea of what we're trying to regulate here. And what we're trying to regulate is bad conduct from bad renters. And that is not regulated through the zoning code. Zoning code is strictly for use of the land, whereas a general bylaw is to regulate through municipal police powers behavior. So the requirement of a license, that's a general bylaw subject matter. It's not a zoning bylaw subject matter. The regulations that we're talking about with having, well, I think I'm getting ahead of ourselves with some of the details that I think you were talking about at the beginning.
Right.
But my recommendation is to follow Provincetown's path on that.
I would agree with that.
I'm not sure I do agree with that. One of the ways to reduce the number of special permits is to make the law better defined. Say what you want to have in the zoning law, and then you don't have to go and get a permit or not. You can either have it or not, so that you set clearer rules. It's one of the sort of fundamental things about form-based zoning, is you make it much clearer what exactly you want, and then you don't have to have so many meetings and special permits. And it would be true for this kind of thing also. If the rules already prohibit something, no, you're not going to get a special permit for it, and you don't go through that process. So I think that there's two sides to that question. Grandfathering, in a way, what we're trying to do, I think, is preserve our current status quo, improve the behavior, but preserve the current status quo. We're not trying to, so grandfathering what exists now, for the most part, I can't think what exactly we would want to prohibit that we have now. We're trying to prevent proliferation, corporate ownership, and also bad behavior.
What zones would you exclude?
I'd do what the land court did, residential zones.
That would be Falmouth Heights, Surf Drive, that's where
they
they
all
want to
are.
be.
Except grandfathering.
Except grandfathered.
So that's
That's a lot.
thousands.
It is a lot.
That's not what I had.
It'd be the whole town, pretty much, like
Yeah.
Old Silver Beach, New Silver Beach,
All
Wood Neck, all the houses along Wood Neck. I just don't think,
I don't see how we'd get townwide support for that.
yeah.
Any thoughts from any of you? Where should we have short-term rentals?
Well, where do they work mostly is by the beach. That's what they come here. They want to enjoy the beach. They want to be able to walk to it. So basically the pockets all around the peninsulas, just, boating, gearing towards center of town. The beautiful parts of our town are where everybody wants their short term. So if we eliminate that, they're not going to come to Falmouth anymore. The stores won't be busy. The restaurants won't be so crowded.
We'll have to build some hotels, which is fine.
Build a few more hotels.
So what's being shown up on the screen, I can't quite get the entire town without zooming in too much, but what you see, let's start with this sort of section of the coastline, is mostly single-family residential. So you've got Residence B, Residence C. Your red areas are your commercial districts. The green areas are the agricultural zones. And purple is public use. And then as we were talking about the marine districts, which are very, very small, they're blue districts down in here. So when you start talking about where would you restrict short-term rentals and residential, as Erica was mentioning, I mean, a lot of the coastline is residential, even into West Falmouth. That's all residential B. And so
So they'd be allowed in Falmouth Heights. Little pocket of Falmouth Heights.
yeah, I mean, so you would essentially be allowing them in your business districts. If you were to exclude them from residential areas, it would just be within your downtown and then some pockets of intersections. And then obviously your public use districts, if you were to change that, and your industrial.
It would basically be a moratorium on them.
Yeah.
Yeah, there really would be.
If we did that through zoning, we wouldn't need a regulation.
Yeah.
We wouldn't need a bylaw.
How does Provincetown then restrict the number of them? If we don't go, that's an impractical way to go, now that we've looked at it. If we don't do that, how do we restrict the number in any given area?
You can put a cap on licenses that are issued.
Right. And that's how they do it. They do it through the general bylaw. So there's a cap on the number of licenses that I think it's by property owner, but I want to verify that with my notes, but they do have a cap, and I believe it's 2 rental units.
It is.
Yeah.
Most of the ones we've read about are, any given owner can own 2.
Yep.
That we've seen so far.
Yep.
But I also recall seeing caps by numbers in neighborhood, how many are allowed in a particular neighborhood.
Yeah, so, I mean, in my opinion, that's a tricky thing, because then it becomes a first come, first serve type situation, and
Well, you have to define neighborhood, which isn't yet.
that too. So it becomes challenging to say, well, you're the last one in, sorry, you can't, because the neighborhood's already full, or what have you, so that might be a challenging
It'll be
component.
just like the mooring list also. You'll be waiting for a license to be
Right.
turned in.
Yeah,
That will open up sale inventory, because they'll all want to sell and leave the town.
Well, maybe not all, but
That might
certainly
not
some
be our
will.
goal, though.
I know.
Right.
I know.
Kick people out of town.
right. Again, you may be impacting people who have been renting for generations, and, they get to a point where they just didn't get into line before someone else. And for decades, they've had a short-term rental, and now all of a sudden, because there's a cap on the neighborhood, and they weren't quick to act before the neighbor, now they can't, operate a short-term rental anymore. So just something to consider.
And would this be a license that they would be able to hold on to, like a mooring, and then somebody else can't get in for 10 years because somebody's holding on to that
I would
license?
say if there's a cap, then it's
Yeah.
gonna turn into that, yeah.
Yeah.
That might be a little difficult, too.
Well, but it's not impossible. Taxi cabs work that way, moorings work that way. Liquor licenses in effect work that way. Anything that you don't want too much of, you cap it. And I think we're in agreement, we don't want too much of it. And we want some incentives to go long-term rental. In effect, a cap is going to work as an incentive toward long-term rentals.
Well, I think a lot of people who own second homes, they want to use a few weeks themselves, they want to use it in the winter, so this is just going to make them sell. They're not going to go year-round, because the whole idea is for their family to get here for a month or a week. So that, I don't necessarily think this is gonna open the year-round pool. If they're not interested in a year-round tenant, they're gonna take their house, their money, and they're gonna go over the bridge and buy somewhere else. But it could open somebody else to come through and put in the year-round pool.
This doesn't restrict renting for 3 months.
No, it does not.
It only restricts short-term rentals.
Yes.
So if you wanted to rent just for the summer months,
Yep.
which is relatively common, those are the
Yeah.
months you can charge the highest rent,
For full term, yeah.
so you're not affecting that.
Yep. Just making a point that a lot of these houses, that they will still not go year-round for this benefit, because they're gonna wanna use it themselves. So to try to help get that 10% year-round in, this won't help them sway that way.
Yes.
It's really interesting to hear the conversation, so I love being part of this and just listening. So there are two parts to this that it seems like. I mean, there's a part which is looking to see if we can convert short-term rentals into long-term rentals through some sort of a process that Liz has already outlined that other towns have taken. And then the other is putting a cap on them, generally speaking. So it's not about a ban, it's about putting a cap on them. And so I just want to make sure that seems to be what we're talking about, right? Because I don't understand some of the conversations then about, people leaving because they've been doing it, if we're grandfathering in existing housing stock that's been done that way, then that's fine. And if people have been thinking about doing it and then they don't get to do it, then, that's just the nature of life, as far as I'm concerned. Whether they decide they're going to pull up stakes and just go over the bridge, I don't know. But if I'm mistaken in the way that I'm thinking about it, please, let me know. But it seems like it's pretty clear that it's not like, again, we're not banning it. We're not trying to take things away from people. We're saying there's an existing problem. If it keeps going that way, it's going to get worse. So we're trying to do something about it as it is, and we're talking about mechanisms in order to effectuate that.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. If you cap a neighborhood or cap it per neighborhood instead of per person, I feel like it would be hard to enforce. I think a lot of people would start doing it without registering.
Mm-hmm. It'll become like a black market of
Right.
rentals.
Which we already have. The people who are not coming in to register.
Well, they're not really required. It's not specifically,
Right?
Yeah.
Well, we're not knocking down doors looking for them, so.
yeah. Like I said, when I went in to register, Robin said I was the first one she could recall coming in, because we don't have a real enforcement system, and we haven't put it out there. This is how we're going to put it out there. Personally, I think it's more important that we pass something that can be accepted by the general public and be simple. I think the important part is to get a license in place, get a phone number for somebody, get some stuff on the website as soon as possible.
Regardless of the bylaw, that's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Because all you do is hire that company that we've been researching, or a company that we've been researching, and then have that company do it under its current we already have a current registration requirement,
We do.
which, to get them registered and to find out who they are and to collect a fee can already happen. It's just about finding a company to go out, only short-term. I would still not know the long-term that aren't doing it, right? We're not gonna know the long-term that aren't gonna do it, unless they show up on the places that these companies go out and find from, VRBOs and so forth. So, that can happen with the existing framework that we have, right? So I think you don't need the bylaw for that, you already do, so.
But we need a bylaw to create enforcement and incentivize their participation, right?
Again, to get every rental registered can happen under the current bylaw. The current bylaw just says thou shalt register your rental, and if you don't, there's a fine. And so you'd need a company to find them by searching the way they search, through their algorithms and so forth, and you'd get them to register. This would be telling you what you have to, a framework of what the expectations, is how I would look at it. What's the expectations of that particular
That and more.
license that we give, and whenever you want to put contingencies on there beyond what's their name on a piece of, their name in a spreadsheet, right?
Yeah, we
And collecting
gotta
the fact, yeah.
Create a system of, penalties for bad behavior.
Right.
And the possibility that you could lose the license. And if we have a licensing authority, then the short-term rental platforms will have to check off the box and say, do the
Correct.
people have the license, or they can't apply, just like
Yeah.
they have to have the Department of Revenue certificate.
And if you wanted to cap, you could cap through the amount of licenses that are issued under this bylaw. You could just say, we're not going more than X number, right? And then after that, the system shuts down and doesn't take new applications. I mean, that's one way to do it. I mean, you can
Right.
do it if you wanted to do it that way. So whatever we build in, we could build in. That's not that hard in terms of at least finding them. The enforcement part's always gonna be the tricky part. Right? So,
Scott, you said the town was making an effort to find a management company. Have they put out an RFP?
I don't think, no, we've just been interviewing companies and looking at them. I don't think he's put an RFP out for anybody at this point, but you do your research, just like if I was going to buy, a software for food inspections, I would probably start looking at them and interviewing them and going through the process of seeing out there and what they have to offer. So that's kind of, I think, where we are now.
Under whose aegis does that work?
Under what, sorry?
Who's doing that work? What
Town
department? is it?
manager.
His
Mike is,
office?
yeah.
And part of what we all are waiting on is the outcome of this effort to figure out what sort of platform will fit best for what we want to do, or what the town wants to do in regulating or managing short-term rentals.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of different options, just like anything you buy nowadays, I want this piece and I want this piece, and each piece has an individual cost, and so there's a lot of different.
We're within 3 minutes of time's up. So, Mara particularly, it would seem to me, if we're in agreement here, it would seem in this room, that we're going to be using as a pattern on Provincetown and the other Cape towns, that we're going to include the pieces that are here in our, whether it sounds like it's more likely to be a general bylaw rather than a zoning bylaw. I don't think it would be difficult now for you to give us that draft, to see what does it look like, and we can work from there so that we can move along. And the other part of it, Jed, is when we were discussing this before, that it would probably be advisable that it be part of a general bylaw, not a zoning bylaw, and that the only way it will show up in the zoning bylaws is by changing the commercial accommodations bylaw. So could you please go through the commercial accommodations bylaw and make a recommendation to this panel on what we ought to be looking at and changing in that in order to give effect to the draft that Maura will have? Is it too soon to have that for our meeting next month?
I can have it for August.
August. So not July, but August.
I'm on vacation that third week, so
Oh, okay, right, it's summer vacation time. Huh, you forget about that as a retired person.
I have an 18-year-old niece who would be very disappointed that I'm not gonna take her shopping if you want me to come here, so.
Yeah, we don't want that to happen.
No,
But we can
okay.
still, next month, discuss the licensing parameters.
Yes, we can, and then in August, we will have a draft, but perhaps, does this interfere with your vacation plans, to have the recommendations on changing the accommodations bylaw for July?
I work through vacation.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Is Mike watching this?
JK. No, it'll be fine.
I will not forget that.
Okay.
He
Well-
actually does.
Thank you, I think we made progress today.
Okay.
We're getting somewhere, and it's getting more concrete, which feels good. What do you
I'll
think?
vote to move the minutes. You'll have to vote on the
Oh,
minutes.
sorry.
Yeah.
You all read the minutes. Is there a motion to approve?
For-
Yes, I move
Second.
approval of the minutes as drafted.
And it's seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And I believe we have a quorum.
The next meeting,
And the next meeting will be,
I put July 30th, which is actually, I think, the 5th Tuesday, because I will be on vacation the 4th
okay,
Tuesday, but if, I mean, it all depends on whatever works for everyone.
Yeah.
okay, so
Is
we'll
that
be
your
back
planning board
together.
night?
I don't, is that our planning board night? It doesn't, no.
Ours are the 8th and the 22nd.
Don't you want to go with that?
Yeah, we could do the
I
22nd.
won't be here, but that's up to Jed.
I'm just saying, I thought it made more sense for everybody to do
Right,
it
it
on the
does.
same day.
I can do the 22nd.
Okay,
Okay, so it's the,
I'll be Melinda for an evening.
okay.
Well,
Bring a
sit next to
wig.
me.
right,
Can you type fast?
I don't
I
get
can.
vacation, I
Do
get.
you have a blonde wig?
Is it the 23rd?
No.
It's
Do you mean the 23rd?
I mean the 23rd.
Might look like a rock star.
I stand corrected, it is the 23rd,
23rd. Okay.
July 23rd.
July 23rd.
And you won't be here, right? I won't be here.
I can be there on the 23rd,
Okay. Yours is the
but I'm
week
not
before.
gonna have the bylaw ready.
Okay, yes,
I said
that's right.
1,000.
You're for August.
1,000 short-term rentals in your,
Okay.
oh, I thought you said.
The draft regulation, we'll call it now.
With your permission, Madam Chair, we would continue to reach out to the communities that are listed in Liz's table and perhaps provide feedback to the group of what we discover from,
That would be great.
okay.
That would be very great. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay, move to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Done. Thank you for your interest in this.